What's going on, everyone? Today we're going to be talking about Sisay, the Weatherlight captain, and all of her super friends. Let's get into it. So, I love super friends. Super friends being the term denoting to have a commander deck centered around Planeswalkers and all of their abilities and how they stack up together. I've built multiple versions of Super Friends decks, and I've found this one to be the most consistently good with the highest win rate. And most of it's centered around Sisay and a lot of the strange interactions that Planeswalkers have. Now, before we talk about the deck itself, we have to first establish what this deck is all about. Talking about the main idea of the deck, you are looking to fix your mana and use Sisay's ultimate ability as your commander to put interesting combinations on the board to essentially lock down or just outright defeat your opponent. Let's really quick talk about Sisay. She's a 3-mana human soldier 2/2 normally. Now she gets a +1/+1 for each color among other legendary permanents you control. So for example, if I bring out this Planeswalker on the board, right, Deck Faden, see his color identity is blue and red. That means Sisay would get 2 +1/+1, right? So essentially she'll get +2/+2. Her power and toughness will be 4/4. Okay, so this is important because you have to start putting different color combinations on the board to then boost up Sisay. Why do we need her strong? Well, obviously she can knock out people with her commander damage, but also her activated ability here. For a Wooburg, you can search your library for a legendary permanent card with converted mana cost less than Sisay's power. So if she's let's give you an example, an 8/8, and you activate her Wooburg ability, she can find anything 7 mana or less, so long as it's a legendary, from your deck and put it onto the battlefield. So this is how you're going to be getting your powerful Planeswalker combinations and closing out the game. Sisay is almost the linchpin of this deck, and if there's any hate focused on her, you're going to have a tough time actually winning. Now this deck specifically is broken down into 4 categories that kind of all complement the whole, so to speak. So the 4 categories of this deck are mana fixing, win con combos, protection, and support. We're going to run through all 4 of those categories, talking about each one and how it supports and how it helps the whole of winning this deck. Let's kick it off with the first most important part, mana fixing. Earlier I said mana fixing is the most important part. Well, it is, because Sisay needs the Wooburg to activate her ability. So most of your deck, a vast majority of it actually, is going to be about fixing your mana base and allowing you to activate her ability with the Wooburg cost. Now, all that is to say this super important thing about the deck. It is not budget friendly. Most times I love making budget friendly decks. This one is definitely not budget friendly. Let's start running through the mana fixing cards. Opening up with Domri, Anarch of Bolas. He's a red-green, so Sisay is going to be getting 2 from that. Plus he has a passive Planeswalker ability. Creatures you control get +1. This also adds to Sisay's overall power cost, so that when she Wooburgs, let's say it's just Sisay and Domri on the board, and you have enough mana to Wooburg Sisay, she would have a power of 5/5 because she's getting +2 from Domri's mana cost or mana identity, and +1 from his passive ability. So she'll be able to search for a 4-mana legendary permanent from the deck using her ability. So talking, his +1 also gives us a mana of red or green, very useful to help fix some things. The next cards we're going to start brushing through quickly. We have Teferi, Temporal Archmage. His -1 allows you to untap 4 target permanents. Those permanents can be anything, so we're most times going to be looking for lands to help fix the mana base. Going into Narset of the Ancient Way. I know the focus is a little messed up. I'm going to fix that in a minute. But her +1 allows you to add a red, blue, or white to your deck, and you can only cast non-creature spells with it. Luckily, we have Planeswalkers, so that's what we're going to use her mana for. All right, we are back. Sorry about that. Just took a second to fix the camera here for everyone. Moving on to the next mana fixing card we have, Faeburl Elder. It gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. Very similar to Sisay. This thing can be a maximum 5/5, but here's the thing. You can tap him, and for each color among permanents you control, you add 1 mana of that color. This is easily, if you have 5 colors, 5-color permanents on the board, he gets 5/5, and he gives you Wooburg whenever you tap him. Perfect for Sisay. Brushing through these, you guys, if you don't know them, you gotta look them up, because these are the good stuff. We have Wayfarer's Bauble, a Soul Ring. Now this one's a little different for most people. A Mystic Skull. For 5 mana, we tap it to flip it. Now I'll just quickly show you what the flip is. But it's a construct called Mystic Monstrosity, and it turns all your lands into lands that can be tapped for any color. Once again, this entire section is mana fixing, so everything's about it. We got a Skyclave Relic, Chromatic Lantern. If we're fixing mana, then you know we gotta have a Chromatic Lantern. Chromatic Orrery, once again, fantastic for Sisay. We got our ramps / mana fixing with Font of Fertility, Farseek, Cultivate, Harrow, Search for Tomorrow, Grow from the Ashes, Rolling Regrowth, Migration Path, and finally Channel the Suns. This one I leave last because, as you can see, for 4 mana you get 5 mana back, but the colors of that mana back is important. That's Wooburg. So that is the major part of our mana fixing. While we're here, let's take a look at our mana base. We have Interplanar Beacon. It allows us to get 2 mana and cast Planeswalkers with it. Anything in our hand is might be a Planeswalker. Forge of Heroes. You can tap it for colorless, or you can use it to put a +1/+1 counter on your commander if it entered the battlefield this turn. It's really good for Sisay. If you cast her and then tap this, she gets +1/+1 automatically. We have Karn's Bastion. Now we are running a Proliferate engine in this deck, so having a land that does that is very useful. Then we have our Sacrifice to search for a specific land, right? Mana fixing here, mana fixing here, mana fixing here, right? Moving into the Command Tower. This is where I would put an Exotic Orchard. I don't have a spare one right now, so I only have these freaking shock, lose a life, gain some, choose a specific land you want. Like I said, my version isn't budget. That being said, here's some budget options. The Vivids. Vivids come in with +2 with 2 counters on them, and you can remove a counter to add 1 mana of any color from them. They work well with Proliferate too, so they wouldn't just be used twice and then die. You use them once, then you start proliferating, and we fix it. The last special land we're going to put in is the World Tree, only for that last part. As long as you control 6 or more lands, all lands you control can be tapped for any color. Very good mana fixing card here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Forest. 10 whole forest. That's a lot of green. 3 plains, 3 islands, 2 swamps, and finally 2 mountains make up our mana base / mana fixing section. Now that we've moved past the section of mana fixing, let's talk about protection. This entire part is all about protecting what we got. We're setting up combinations on our side of the board. The last thing we want is our opponent removing pieces of our super important Planeswalker combos. So, kicking it off, we have Deck Faden. We're using his abilities, specifically his -2, to gain control of a target artifact. If your opponent has something pesky, or if he has a good mana tool that you can use, Deck Faden comes in and takes it for his own. Moving on to Narset, we're using it for the ability slowing down our opponent, stopping them from drawing more than one card each turn, or we're using her -2 to look at the top 2 cards of your library and add a non-creature, non-land card into your hand. Remember, most of our deck is Planeswalkers or spells, so we're going to be using her -2 to fix any sort of issues we may have. Teferi, we're using him for his anti-instant stuff, attacks on your opponent. Your opponents can only cast spells at sorcery speed. So this works well if we're popping off on our turn and they're looking to drop an instant to remove our combo pieces. Teferi slows them down, right? It also has a little bit of a bounce back with his -3, return an artifact, creature, or an enchantment to your hand, and allows you to draw through your deck. Before I even walk away with him, I always want you guys to pay attention to these colors, white and blue. So that means so long as he's on the board, Sisay is getting +2/+2. Oko, a blue-green Planeswalker. We want his +1, people. Target artifact or creature loses all abilities and becomes an elk with base power and toughness 3/3. Very mean thing to do to a commander on your opponent's side of the board, but we do it if we need to slow him down or if he's trying to pop us in the nose and ruin our combinations. We got Tamio. Press F in chat for Tamio, of course. Field Researcher. She's a green, white, blue 4 loyalty Planeswalker. We're using her mainly for her -2 or her +1 sometimes. Her -2 taps 2 non-land permanents and they don't untap for the opponent's untap step. This is good to stop those creatures from attacking killing our Planeswalkers. You can choose up to 2 creatures with her +1, and if they deal damage to you, you draw a card. So useful, but we really want to focus on her -2 and the 3 colors that she gives us. Donovan, Hand of Control. This is going to focus right now. Artifact, instant, and sorcery spells your opponent casts cost 1 more to cast. Just a little bit of a tax to annoy your opponent. We got Ashiok, Dream Render. This is an anti-graveyard card for your opponent. Spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause their controller to search their library. And for his -1, you can mill 4 cards from an opponent and exile the graveyard. Now we're talking about Karn's Temporal Sundering. I mean, if we got a Planeswalker deck, we gotta have a broken card like this. 6 mana. You can only cast it if you control a legendary creature or a Planeswalker, which we probably always will. The target player takes an extra turn after this one, and it allows you to bounce 1 card on the field to its owner's hand. You can only use this once as it is exiled after using. But this card has saved my bacon a lot of times because an extra turn untaps all your lands, lets you pop off with Sisay, and kind of allows you to play by yourself for a second, whereas your opponent is just frothing at the mouth, ready to smack your face in. Teferi's Protection. It's the big old nope card, right? Your life can't change, you gain protection from everything, and all permanents phase out. Nope, just stop your opponent from doing anything. Blessed Respite. Shuffle a graveyard or shuffle your graveyard into your library and prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Preventing the combat damage is what we're really using this for, and the graveyard return allows us to return any combo pieces that your opponent may have dealt with already. Moving on, we have a Moment's Peace, right? Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn again, and you can flash it back for the same effect. Heroic Intervention. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Whelming Wave. Return all creatures to their owner's hands except for krakens, leviathans, octopi, and serpents. So here's the thing. It says all creatures, and we run mainly a Planeswalker board. So while it's removing all creatures, a large group of creatures, our Planeswalkers stay behind, and that's what we're looking to do. We can also target bounce with Aether Gale. Return 6 target non-land permanents to their owner's hands. We also have the a budget bounce card for everyone. River's Rebuke, 6 mana. Return all non-land permanents target player controls to their hands. Kaya's Wrath for a board wipe. Destroy all creatures. It's fine, we have Planeswalkers. You gain life equal to the number of creatures you controlled that were destroyed this way. Despark, a targeted removal to exile a target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. And finally, Raven Form, right? Exile target artifact or creature, its controller makes a bird for it, right? So that's all of our protection cards in this section. We've reached support. Now these cards are all about supporting our big enablers. Our big combo pieces need a way to start ramping up. And these support cards give your opponents something to worry about, and it allows us to slowly start building our presence. We have the Oath of Nissa and the Oath of Kaya. Now we're going to come back to Oath of Kaya, but let's just talk about them really quick. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast Planeswalker spells with the Oath of Nissa, and when it enters the battlefield, you can look at the top 3 cards, reveal a creature, land, or Planeswalker, and put it into your hand. This is useful for fixing anything you may be left behind. I always use this mostly for a land to help fix my mana base. Going on to the Oath of Kaya, though. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. Keep that in your mind, people. We're going to come back to this. Whenever an opponent attacks a Planeswalker you control with 1 or more creatures, Oath of Kaya deals 2 damage to that player, and you gain 2 life. So this is just like a little bit of a, you don't want to hit my Planeswalkers, I'll punish you. The last thing I'll say is that these are legendary enchantments. Since they're legendary, they do trigger for Sisay. So she's getting +1/+1 for white and black while Oath of Kaya is on the board. Okay, so these are very good cards. I mentioned earlier that we are doing a proliferate sub-engine, and this is it. We have Atraxa. If you don't know who Atraxa is, look into her. She's scary. 4 mana, 4/4, Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, proliferate. Flux Channeler, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, proliferate. Yeah, all of our Planeswalkers are non-creature spells, so whenever we cast a Planeswalker, we're proliferating with Flux Channeler. Deep Glow Skate, when it enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents. So if we have Planeswalkers on the board and we play Deep Glow Skate, it doubles their counters, potentially allowing them to just ultimate on the spot, use their most powerful ability. Evolution Stage, whenever you play a land, you proliferate. We got Vorniclex. This guy's a bit of a hate, but I use him almost as a doubling season since I don't have one right now. 6 mana, 6/6, trample haste, and if 1 or more counters we put on a permanent or player, put twice that many counters on that permanent or player instead. The other part, the tax, where it halves the number of counters an opponent may have, it's always good to have, but I use Vorniclex mainly for his top ability. We got Tezzere's Gambit. Draw 2 cards and proliferate for 3 generic and 1 Phyrexian mana, Phyrexian blue. Steady Progress, proliferate, then draw a card. Continuous Plan, proliferate, draw a card. Right? Now moving on to the other types of support cards we got. We got Luxior, the Gift. Right now this card is a new one. It's my newest card that I've added into this collection. We use this to turn our Planeswalkers into threats that our opponent now have to start looking at. Normally, our Planeswalkers sit there and just passively use abilities and effects. Equipping this to a Planeswalker turns it into a creature, so your opponent can't target it as an attack target, but he can target it with creature removal, so you have to be careful of that. This card turns your Planeswalkers into creatures, so they have power equal to what their loyalty was. And it's a really good card. I usually have it in here for a almost like a include, just because it's thematic. I could probably remove it for something a lot more efficient, but I really like this card. Cart the Lion. I never seen him pop off in this deck, but it's always good to have some support and protection. When he enters the battlefield or a Planeswalker dies, it allows you to search through the top 7 to try to find another Planeswalker and put it into your hand. Also, all Planeswalker loyalty abilities you activate give you an extra +1. So if you do anything, even a minus ability on a Planeswalker, they do the minus and a +1 at the same time. So Karth is really good for that. Talking about the Prismatic Bridge next, a 5-mana legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal cards until you reveal a creature or a Planeswalker, and put that card on the battlefield. This is really cool. The other side is a god that taps your legendary creatures for any color mana. We don't use that side too much. It's mostly the Prismatic Bridge, because the Prismatic Bridge being on the field is a full Wooburg color, so Sisay would get +5/+5 from that being on the board. It also allows a lot of different, it leaves it a bit to chance in that now you're looking through the top, but it makes it simpler in that it's throwing things on the board. We got Darken, the Shadow Slayer, 3 colors. The main reason he's in here is because when he enters the battlefield, he enters it with a number of loyalty counters equal to the number of lands you control. You're going to have a lot of lands on the board with this deck. And his -3 exiles a specific creature. It's really good for dealing with those pesky, indestructible creatures that are looking to kill you. It also allows you to put an artifact card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield with his ultimate. So any of your mana fixing cards that were thrown away by an opponent, it allows you to bring back. We got a Johnny. Creatures you control have vigilance. You gain 3 life, or you can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control, and a loyalty counter on each other Planeswalker you control. Very good for buffing up Sisay and all Planeswalkers on your board. This girl's usually here, the Sublime Artificer. She's here because her colors are red and blue, so Sisay's getting +2 from that. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, such as a spell or a Planeswalker, you create a colorless servo that allows you to block when your opponents are swinging in. The -1 allows you to create a copy of another target artifact you control. We don't really use that -1. Her main things are here for the passive and the colors. So she's there. Kasmina, the Enigmatic Sage. Once again, we're here for her colors. This thing is a little tricky though. Her passive. Each other Planeswalker you control has loyalty abilities of Kasmina. So any Planeswalker that's on the board with Kasmina has Kasmina's abilities, which means we could give a Planeswalker +2 where normally it wouldn't have a +2, right? I know that's kind of tough to explain. If you give me 1 second, I will show you. So for example, Narset. Normally her only ability is a -2 that completely starts killing her. But now that she shares a board presence with Kasmina, we can instead use her +2 ability to raise her loyalty counters. Okay, so that's mainly why we like Kasmina. A little bit of a strange include, a strange addition. Next, we have this guy, Kethis, the Hidden Hand. Legendary spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast. That is huge. All of our Planeswalkers are now cheaper. All of our legendary spells are cheaper. Legendary enchantments, everything's going to be cheaper thanks to Kethis. And his second ability is even better. You exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard that you're not using, and it allows you to cast all other legendary cards in your graveyard, right? So, for example, you exile 2 useless things, say your Kasmina and your Sublime Artificer, from the graveyard, and now you can cast your combo pieces that were removed earlier using Kethis' ability. It's a great addition in this deck, and his colors are really nice too. The last thing we have, it's not legendary, unfortunate. I wish it was, but we have the Broker's Ascendancy. At the beginning of each end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each Planeswalker you control. This is passively buffing up everyone on the board. Both your creatures and your Planeswalkers are getting stronger just by the Ascendancy's presence. That is just about the end for the support cards of this deck. Now, if you guys have been keeping track, we're going pretty fast through this because it's time to talk about combo pieces and win cons. This is the moment I've been waiting for. Talking about combo pieces and win cons for this deck. There are a lot of ways to win in this deck, which is why it's one of my favorites. Let's take it from the top. Talking about super important cards that you always want to keep an eye out for. We're looking at Spark Double. It enters the battlefield as a copy of a creature or Planeswalker, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter if it's a creature, and an additional loyalty counter if it's a Planeswalker. This is a combo enabler. We'll come back to it later. Oath of Teferi, another combo enabler. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a permanent you control. Doesn't really matter what it is, but it comes back to the battlefield during the end step. The main reason we want it, though, is you may activate loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control twice each turn, rather than once. Scary stuff. The last combo enabler we have is the Chain Veil. For each, obviously, excuse me 1 second. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate a loyalty ability, you lose 2 life, which is fine. We're always going to be having a Planeswalker on board, doing something. But for 4 mana, each Planeswalker you control may activate one of its loyalty abilities once this turn, as though none of it is essentially another Oath of Teferi that allows you to activate Planeswalker abilities twice. Okay? So, those are the combo enablers. Now, the rest of the cards in this section are that use the combo enablers. So, for example, we have Aminatou, the Fate Shifter. We're using her for her -1. Exile another target permanently you control or you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. It's just a -1 bounce. We have Jace, the Cunning Castaway. His -5 creates 2 tokens that are copies of Jace, except they're not legendary. You can also do his -2 to create just an illusion creature to block for you. We're really looking at that -5 though. We have the King himself, Nicol Bolas, the Dragon God. He combos with almost all of the things that I've specified so far, because he has all loyalty abilities of all other Planeswalkers on the battlefield. His ultimate is a -8. Each opponent who doesn't control a legendary creature or Planeswalker loses the game. His -3 allows you to destroy a creature or Planeswalker. His +1 draws you a card and forces each opponent to exile a card from their hand or a permanent they control. He is the game ender. Most times he just crushes it and wins once he touches down, so long as he has someone supporting him. The last 2 cards in this section are going to be these guys that combo together. We have Knowledge Pool, which is an artifact, and we also have the Azorius Renegade. So essentially what this card does is that when it enters the battlefield, all players exile the top 3 cards of their library, and instead of casting from your hand, you instead exile a card from your hand, and it allows you to cast one of those exiled cards that were removed for free. I know it's a bit confusing. I'll just give you a quick example. Let's say this card comes in. and we exile the top 3 cards. Boom, boom, boom. These guys are now in exile. I have enough mana though, so I'm going to cast my Chain Veil, right? So I tap 4 mana to cast Chain Veil. Chain Veil now gets exiled, and I now choose any one of these 3 cards to come into play. I'll choose Oath of Kaya. So now these 3 cards are in exile, and I can continue doing this, you know, as I cast spells, just constantly having like a hand outside of the game. That's what this card is all about, Knowledge Pool. But coupled with this is an instant win. Each opponent can't cast spells greater than the number of lands that player controls. So it slows down your opponent. He can't use mana rocks to cheat in things. And the second ability wins out the game if it's coupled with Knowledge Pool. Your opponent can't cast spells if no mana was spent to cast it, right? So no mana would be spent to use the ability of Knowledge Pool if they're trying to cast something in. So they lose because anything they try to cast is immediately countered. So these 2 are a combo in and of themselves. This is only a 2 mana and that's a 6 mana. They work extremely well together. So well, in fact, that I actually keep them in the deck, even though they don't combo with anything else. All right, so that's that combo. Let's talk about all the other combos that this deck provides. Combo number 1. The Infinite Nicol Bolas. We call it Nicol Bolas the Infinite. What you need is Jace on the board, and a Nicol Bolas, and some way to give Nicol Bolas a +1/+1 counter. So that could be an Oath of Teferi. That could be anything else, any of the proliferate cards that give a +1/+1 counter that allows you to proliferate. That will be enough to combo enable this, the Infinite Nicol Bolas. Now, how does it work? Nicol Bolas has the ability of all other Planeswalkers. Jace has a -5 that creates 2 copies of himself. Since Nicol Bolas creates 2 copies, since he has the ability of Jace, we can use Nicol Bolas's -5, right? Because he has Jace's ability to create 2 copies of Nicol Bolas. Those 2 copies are on the board. We can then, if they have a way to proliferate themselves, you can create 2 more copies of Nicol Bolas, and then 2 more copies of Nicol Bolas, and then 2 more copies of Nicol Bolas. Coupled with something like Oath of Teferi, we can use Nicol Bolas's +1 to have an opponent exile their card in their hand and a permanent they control, and then do their -5 to kill themselves, right? So these 3 are a win con, right? Oath of Teferi, Jace, and Nicol Bolas are a win con. So any sort of way to have Nicol Bolas activate twice and then ultimate himself while still buffing himself +1 is the best way to do it. I call this one the Infinite Bolas because you are destroying your opponent and making more Nicol Bolas, an infinite, unending nightmare of god dragons. So I really like that combo. The next main combo pieces, the main combos we have in the deck, is called Playing Catch with Aminatou. So we have Aminatou on the board, and we have a way to trigger Planeswalker abilities twice. That could be Oath of Teferi or the Chain Veil, right? So Aminatou's on the board, and one of those abilities are allowing us to use their abilities twice. Well, all we need to do is have some sort of way or someone for Aminatou to play catch with or bounce with. A Spark Double works, or even our good old friend Nikki B can play catch with Aminatou. The way it works is that since Nicol Bolas has the abilities of Aminatou, he can do her -1 that allows you to bounce something on the board. Having them together and being able to activate their abilities twice looks like this. We use Aminatou -1 to bounce, let's say, a land. and that land obviously comes back in untapped, because that's what most lands do. Then we wait. We don't use her second ability yet. We have Nicol Bolas. Nicol Bolas uses Amanatu's -1 to bounce, let's say, 2 lands, right? He uses that ability, that -1, 2 times. He bounces 2 lands. He's used his abilities twice. Amanatu will use that last -1 to bounce Nicol Bolas. He comes back in. And since he's a new iteration of himself entering the board, he can use those Planeswalker abilities again. He uses one -1 to bounce a land, and the other -1 to bounce Amanatu. They keep bouncing each other back and forth, and since they can activate abilities multiple times, we can win outright using Nicol Bolas' +1, or we can give ourselves infinite mana because we're bouncing lands, or we can win by bouncing just Oath of Kaya back and forth, right? Any of these are instant win cons if they're playing catch, bouncing each other back and forth. Catch isn't the best term. Maybe it's tag. Amanatu's game of tag. I like that. All right? So that's their combination. Let's move on to our final thoughts. All right, so we've gone over every major combo the deck has. But let's never forget that the one who made it all possible was Sisay. Sisay Super Friends is all about protecting your board, fixing your mana, and getting these instant win combos online using Planeswalkers. It's not a cheap deck. Most of these cards are very expensive, at least for my cheap self. This is version 1 of the deck. If there are any changes, major changes, every once in a while I'll upload a updated version of this deck. But if you like Super Friends, I highly recommend you look into this type of deck, because it allows you to have a taste of what Super Friends can do. Remember, they're not strong alone. They're strongest together and comboing off of each other. So thanks again for watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you guys next time.